I thought what we'd do is we're going to try to get into the beginning of a cooperative plan to come up with ideas for the Weaver House on the UMass campus. We were very fortunate that we had an invitation that we looked for, but we got the invitation. And Jim and I and a few others, including Dan and Bob Barboza, had a visit inside the Weaver House. And we've been kind of curious as to what it looked like and what condition it was in and stuff like that. And we had a chance to talk with a guy named Michael Hayes. And Michael Hayes is the Assistant Vice Chancellor in charge of the campus plan at UMass. And he was very, very gracious, and he took a lot of time and showed us all over the place, and shared some pictures that he's got, is willing to share more, and invited us to come up with some plans and to try to get a group that represented the community as well as the university and maybe former family members of the families that have lived there and stuff like that, so that we could present to him and he to the whoever he deals with in the campus planning, some additions to the master plan for the UMass campus. That's a terrific invitation. So we agreed, of course, to do that. And in preparation for that, I've been talking to a variety of people to see if they'd be willing to work on the planning committee. And in addition to all the members and friends of the Dartmouth History and Art Society. And so tonight, what I'm going to do, try to do a fairly quick overview for those of you who may not have seen what we know about the house and the man, and then get into kicking up ideas so that we can record them, and then when we get our group meetings going, get back together and compose a draft of a plan to submit to Mr. Michael Hayes, who's the guy at UMass in charge of the master plan. So I'm going to start with the overview. Some of these are slides you've seen before because I presented this once before, some of it. But I've since that time learned quite a few new things and discovered some new questions. And I'll talk with you about some of the things we already know, some of the new things that we've learned, and some of the questions that we still have that we're still doing research on. Okay, Don, next slide. And meanwhile, while we're doing this overview, keep in mind that we're eventually going to be looking for inputs and ideas to record so that we can begin the process of planning something to submit to the university. And I just put down a few things, but I'm sure there are many more. I can think of one already. How are we going to fund the thing? How are we going to fund whatever it costs to do? Is one I haven't got here. But uses for the farmhouse, uses on the campus and in the community, restoration or repairs. What are we going to do to it? What historical interpretation should we or shouldn't we provide? What about the grounds and gardens? Michael, when he showed us around, said that he was open to ideas on what to do with some of the gardens and grounds around the farmhouse, which is another nice feature of that whole place. And of course, we got the burial ground, and the burial ground is not only the Joseph Weaver and his wife, but his children and one of his grandchildren, who happened to have been one of the new things we have. The grandson was Joseph A. Weaver, and his father was David. And Joseph served in the Civil War. We have his registration in the Civil War. He came out of the Civil War and died at the age of 29. But before he died of consumption, before he died, he served as a school teacher. There used to be a little schoolhouse right on Old Westport Road, very close to the Cummings house, where the Cummings house is. And I'm quite sure he taught there because his father lived in the old Cummings house, father and mother. His mother's name was Philadelphia Cowan Weaver. And he was also on the school committee in Dartmouth for brief period that he lived and taught. So he was a real contributor here. The family that lived there before the university took the property was a Polish farm family named Zela. We'll talk about them later. But they had Polish picnics there. I lived on Citadel in those days. They used to go hunting for mushrooms at certain times of the year. They had big crowds of people roaming around the woods and collecting mushrooms and stuff. The house, of course, was the home of a veteran of this revolution, but his grandson was a veteran of the Civil War. So I would think something to do with veterans might be a thought on what to do with the property. And of course, the American Civil War connection with Joseph A. Weaver, and any other thoughts that we have. Okay, next slide. Now we'll get into a review, but keep in mind the ideas as we go. I'm sure you need mental notes. Go ahead, next one. Okay, I'm going to talk about his life, and go ahead, next one. I'll try to move fairly fast because I'd like to get into the discussion with you quickly. And he was born in Fall River. And Fall River, of course, was a one-time part of Freetown. And the source for much of my information about Joseph comes from his deposition when he was applying for revolutionary pension. And his deposition was given first person under oath, and we have a record of it. And I'm, in many cases, just quoting what he said in his own words as they were recorded. He was born in Troy, in the county of Bristol, in the state of Massachusetts, year 1758, the 29th day of January. Next slide, please. His first revolutionary service is when he was 18 years old. And in those days, this is the militia, so they'd call him up and say, we want you guys to go down. And they sent him down to what they called Howland's Ferry. That's down at what you might know as the Stonebridge area of Tiverton. It used to be a ferry boat over to Aquidneck Island in Newport. And next slide, please. He was drafted, quote unquote, and discharged. Drafted in those days didn't mean the same as it does today. Drafted means time to come up, get your gun and come, and we got an assignment for you. And they'd go on the assignment, and after a couple of months or something, they'd send him home again. Then they'd call him again and send him again. But drafted and discharged many times after his first enlistment. And the last time was September 1778. He was already either betrothed or married. I forget the date of his marriage. Next slide down. He was married. His intentions were 1787. He was married January 1788. So that last call, he was a married man. His wife was a woman named Sarah Bryant. We know her parents. I don't remember their name, but they're from Freetown, and she bore him 6 or 7 children. Go ahead, next slide. Try it again.
There it is.
Okay. I want to go back one, please. We do have quite a few facts about him, and some of these I have uncovered since the last presentation on him. He was a purchaser of real estate in 1788 in Dartmouth. And for 18 pounds, he got 20 acres and some buildings. Don't try to translate the money. Times have changed a bit. And he was in the 1790 census, which was the first census, he resided in Westport. And he was a real estate grantee. He bought some more property in Westport in 1792 from a guy named Mosier, who was at that time already moved away, was living in Dutchess County, New York State, and he paid 215 mil silver dollars. You remember the continental dollars weren't worth too much money. There's a lot of inflation. And was it worth a continental? You've heard that term. So they looked for money in hard coin when they could get it. Next slide, please. Now, some of the stuff that's new, to new discovery of Joseph Weaver, he apparently was a part owner of a forge. You all know where Forge Road is in Westport. There was a forge there, And among other things, some of the capital property around the forge, there was a dam, a stream of water, which was the power source for the forge. There was a coal house, coal spelling, of course. This is how he spelled it, and how the deed was spelled in the deed. And he sold a third of all this stuff to a guy who was a very well-known businessman in this area, William Roach Jr., who was a big whaling merchant who was originally from Nantucket, came to New Bedford and really made New Bedford what it is. And that's in 1795. In 1798, apparently things weren't going too well for Joseph because two different people took his money away from, filed a suit. The sheriff threatened to put him in jail, but he sold some property to pay some debts that he owed. And this was in Westport. We know that in 1798, he lived in Dartmouth in the house we call the Weaver House, that's now on the campus. And we know that from a newspaper article that was advertising a farm for sale that had 3 houses on it. One of the houses, Joseph Weaver was living in it. Another house, a guy named Daniel, the newspaper article said you can contact either Joseph Weaver living on the property, and it was in that house, Daniel Howland, who was in Westport, or another name that I've forgotten at the moment, but not relevant right now. And one of the next slides will tell you that he apparently was in business with Daniel Howland. Those 3 houses were all the houses on what we know as the original Cummings farm. One of the houses was the Cummings house that is now on Westport Road. The second house was the Weaver house. The third house was what's called the Pond house that burned down sometime in the 1920s. And we have the fire records of what happened there. And that house was on what later became T.L. Lynham's son's property. It's right down at the end of Lynham Lane on Old Westport Road, just to the west of the Cummings house. Okay, he again, now he was living in the Weaver house in 1798. He apparently was paying rent or something, or made a deal with Lemuel Barker or somebody. But then in 1805, he found the means to buy the house. He paid $1,000 for 50 acres plus the house. And my guess is these were continental dollars, not Spanish mill, these are coins. Okay, next slide, please, Don. I have sources for all this material and the original documents that you could read if you want. I'm not going to present them here, but we have all that stuff and we can put it all up on our website if anybody's interested. When I use the acronym BCLR, that's just short for Bristol County Land Records. And a number followed by a colon. The number is the volume number where you find the deed, and then the other pages where the deed is. That's 493 and 494, not 493, 493. Okay, next slide. Now his family, next slide. He had these children, and as far as we know, next slide, the only one that married was David. And he married this woman named Philadelphia Cowan, whose parents were Abishai and Hope Chase. The Chases from Chase Road, apparently. And they got married in 1833. Philadelphia apparently was a popular name at this particular time. Everything was celebrating independence and so forth. And she was called Phila for short, and they had one son, Joseph Weaver, who only lived a short time. But at 23, he enrolled in was registered for the U.S. Civil War, and we have his registration papers. We know he was a school teacher because in his death record it said he was a school teacher. And we also know he's a member of the Dartmouth School Board, and he died at age 29, 9 months and 16 days. He and his mother and father are all buried in the burial ground that's there on the campus. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, the house, next slide. Okay, we'll try to answer the basic questions, but be aware that there are still some open questions about the house, and I'll tell you what those are as we move along. Next slide. Property history. Well, first we'll talk about where it's located, and I've got a couple of more slides on that. I was not moving again. There we go. This is a campus map, and down here on the lower left side of the campus where the pond is where the house is. And the next slide will show a little closer up view. This of course is this is an artist's point of view, but that's the house itself with the L, and this is the former barn that was there. There are other couple of buildings later on that we have some pictures of, but go next slide, Don. Okay, next slide. I got a little crazy with I'm just learning how to use this software. So this is a picture taken at the time it was taken by the university. It's a very small house, and the L, I'm not sure why the L doesn't show in that picture. It must be the angle of the picture. But there's a pole. I'm not sure if that's there now. But next slide, Don. This is a different slide than we have seen before. This was from the Macros database that's up on the Massachusetts Cultural Resource Center. And this is what these buildings look like. And this just shows the L. This is taken around 1983. Next slide, Don. This is a more recent view, 2015. And again, the angle, we don't see the L, but we know it's there, because there's the little ramp, little bulkhead door. Next slide. And this is going from the laneway from Luciville Road. This is technically, I think it's 109. Is that the number? 109 Luciville Road, I think.
170? No, 370.
370? What?
I think it's 370.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's got I used to deliver newspapers in there. Next slide, please. And this is a kind of a cute little picture with the roses by the lawn. Okay, next slide. Okay, what's the history? Next slide. We have the deed that tells us that Lemuel Barker and his wife Mariah Tripp owned it prior to 1805 when they sold it to Joseph Weaver. It's not clear when it was built, but a clue might be that Lemuel Barker married Mariah in 1793, and we know from the newspaper article trying to sell the farm, Weaver was living in 1798. So we've concluded with those facts it was probably built between 1793 and 1798. Next slide, please. This is a transcription. This is the 1798 newspaper article. This is 1798. And notice that Daniel Howland, for terms of sale, apply to Daniel Howland in Dartmouth, Charles Cornell in Westport, or Joseph Weaver living on the premises. Well, we know he's living in that house. What I've done, this is reasonably easy to read, but I've typed it out in modern day font, and I won't read it to you. You can read better than I can, I'm sure. But it basically says it's 1 mile from the head of the Coxet River. And you'll notice that in the prior data I gave you that Weaver was down at the head of Westport. He was at the forge. The land that he sold was down in the head of Westport area. This isn't far from the head of Westport. In those days, people walked everywhere they went anyway, so 1 mile isn't too bad. You know, I could even walk a mile. I used to deliver my papers for a longer route than that on foot. Sometimes I had a bike, but not always. Okay, next slide, please, Don. One of the notes that I've added to this, the guy Daniel Howland, it was one of the people to check out if you wanted to purchase that farm and the orchards. He was, in 1799, he and Joseph Weaver sold about 30 acres of land in Westport with all the buildings thereon for $400 to a guy named Aaron Childs in New Bedford. So they would, in that advertisement for the property, and they probably did business together, they owned property together. So I just made that note. Next slide, Don. Now, I'm call your attention now to this map because we've been talking about this a little bit. Again, the pond, no university, of course. D. Weaver's David Weaver, he was living there. This is the head of Lucy Little Road, where the sand pit is now. Mrs. E. Lamb is living in the house that we call the Pond House. That was the third house for sale when the big farm was for sale. This house, and this house were the three houses advertised for sale. T. Weaver is Thomas Weaver, the son of Joseph Weaver, the Revolutionary veteran. D. Weaver is the other son. Those are two sons. This one, as far as we know, never married. Mrs. Lucy Little lived there. Lucy Little Road is named for him. Some people seem to think she was a Native American. I've done a little research. So far, I don't see any evidence that she was a Native American. But she married a guy named Otis Little. Her husband's name was Otis Little. And there's a big probate file available to find out all you want to know about Lucy Little. A lot of what you don't know about Lucy Little. Notice the school. In the 1860s, in the G. Almy house, which is the Cummings house, David Weaver and his wife Philadelphia lived with their son Joseph, and I'm quite sure he taught right in that school right there. And he was also a member of the town school board of Dartmouth. Next slide, please. This is just a 2 year later map. These are maps by Walling, yeah, Henry Walling, who does fantastic work on maps. We've got lots of them on our website. The pond again, the ice house is right on that peninsula. And T. Weaver's still there. School number 8 is the school. T. Weaver Place and so forth. And over in here, Huldah Potter and Joshua Potter and so forth and so on. Some of the property, I think Joshua Potter is right here. And we know that that house was once a Lemuel Barker house also. So just connecting things for you. Next slide, please, Don. This is what we're calling the Pond House, the Lamb House, the third house, the one that got burned down. This is what it looked like. There's some question about what the Weaver House looked like in 1798. It maybe looked like this. Next slide, please. And this is what the Cummings house has looked like. It looks more or less like this now, but this is from a 1908 picture from Palmer Worth for the Bedford-William Museum. And since all three of those properties were on that one farm, the likelihood is that the houses had a similar look. Next slide, please. We have some nice pictures of this. Again, Palmer Worth. Next slide. It's a beautiful old house. One of the things I want to insert right now, because I don't have a slide to show this, but in the Macros file, undocumented asserted is the suggestion that there might have been a fire at the Weaver house, and that fire might mean that the house was bigger originally than it is now. Thank you. And if so, we haven't seen any evidence of it yet, but we're looking for evidence, because if there was a big fire at that house, there will be some evidence someplace. And we've started a search in microfilm records of newspaper articles and fire department records and stuff like that. But so far, we've seen nothing. Michael Hayes is going to take us back into the basement of the house, and then if there is any evidence of fire, we'll see it, I think. But that's one of the open questions. Is the building there the original building, or is it a replacement building that was built on the same foundation after the fire? In either case, it was just a place where Joseph Weaver lived. Maybe not in that building, but in a building that was there. He's buried in that burial ground. So I don't think it changes anything that we're interested in, because we still want to honor the man and his service and so on. Next slide, let's go talk about who lived there. We believe the Barkers built the house probably at the time when he got married. The Weavers lived there for quite a while. But the deed records that we've been able to dig out identify these three families. But I haven't actually translated all the deeds yet, but we have them. And we have more work to do, obviously, to research those families. And this family, Andrew and Caroline Zala, did live there. They lived there when I was a kid. And they were my paper customers, and I knew some of the family. Next slide, please. Since it's quite obvious that this house is a significant place, whether or not it was burned down, it's the home of the Weavers. Next slide, please. And the plaque that we gave to Michael Hayes, and he took, I'm not sure if he's put it on the house yet or not, but he took it from us with very graciously. But that's what it says on it. Home of Joseph Weaver, Revolutionary veteran, built by L. Barker around 1793, 79. Very simple stuff. Next slide. We've only kind of scratched the surface here, but that's all you need. That's all you want, I'm sure. You can get a lot more on our website. We haven't put up all the stuff we have yet, but we'll continue to add. We'll have a file with the Weaver House featured in it. There'll be a lot more material before we're through. Next slide, please. Okay, his service. We've seen this before. I'll just quickly go over this. As we said, he enlisted at age 18, was drafted many times. You can read every detail of it if you want to in his deposition. It's several pages long, but it's kind of colorful in his own language. Next slide, Don. Among other places, he was sent to Howland's Ferry. He was working under Captain Daniel Duvall. He went to Fogland Ferry. Those are both points on the mainland where you could get a ferry boat over to the island where Newport and Portsmouth are. And that, the people over on that island before, there were very many people over here, in this part of Dartmouth at least. In June of 1778, he was sent to guard the shore from New Bedford River, that's Acushnet River, to the Slocum's River in Dartmouth under the command of Captain George Hoskins. Next slide. While he was there, quartered there, meaning he slept there, and it was at Masham, they got a call from somebody, some messenger came and said the British have burnt the village of Bedford. The village of Bedford was part of Old Dartmouth before it was New Bedford. And as soon as they heard that, when they're down in Masham, they got in formation and marched back to New Bedford, back to Bedford. You can just imagine walking from Masham. And when they arrived, it was evening. They probably got the message in the morning. It probably took them all day to walk up to Bedford Village. The place was on fire. Both the village and all the boats in the harbor were on fire. And the three men had been shot and was then laying on the streets. Nobody was there to correct his English. Next slide, please. Good thing. These are all in quotes. I'm quoting his deposition. The said Joseph says he assisted to take care of those men that were shot. One of them, by the name of Trafford, was dead. One by the name of Russell died in a few minutes after he got to him. And while he was conveying him to the house, he's probably been laying there all day long while they were marching up from. And the other, by the name of Thomas Cook, was mortally wounded and died about a week after from his wounds. The said Joseph, now this is in the deposition, but the guy taking the deposition, repeating what he heard from Joseph Weaver, says that he was employed for some time saving property from fire in the village of Bedford. Everything here we have seen corroborated by other witnesses and other historians who are talking about. Next slide, please. One thing, I did a little bit of research, and I'm not going to read this, but to make a long story short, be careful. Major Charles Gray was sent by Sir Henry Clinton. Is it Henry Clinton? Whatever. Yeah, General Sir Henry Clinton. Because Newport wasn't in the same condition they thought it was. So, well, we don't need you in Newport. Go burn some property in Bedford and in Martha's Vineyard in Fairhaven. So Gray sent his troops and they landed on the foot of County Street, marched up County Street, over to Tarpon Hill, and burned Bedford Village down. And they didn't make much resistance. But before they got to Fairhaven, the Fairhaven militia had been alerted, and they gave them some resistance. So this is all well-documented stuff. Next slide, Don. So, and next slide. For all this service that he did, he filed for pension, and he got the pension. His wife got the pension after he died also. It wasn't much, 40 bucks, I think it was 40 bucks a month, I believe. And there's a record of how many months he got paid and so forth. Next slide, please. And his resting place, next slide. You've all seen this old burial ground where I used to hit golf balls. It's kind of a quaint old burial ground. It's quite far from the house, actually. But there's an old cornfield down near it. And next slide, please. A nice old tree. And this is Joseph Weaver's grave. It gives all the records, including his birth date, death date. Next slide, please. This is his wife, Sarah, who's a Bryant. Next slide, please. And this is one we didn't show before. This is the grandson, Joseph Weaver. So Joseph Weaver, son of David and Phil. See Phil, P-H-I-L-A-P. See that? And I put down here. He died in 1869, 29 years. He was a Civil War vet, a school teacher, and Dartmouth School Committee man. Next slide, please. This is the record from Judy Lund's book on all the burial grounds in Dartmouth that she recorded. And this basically gives fundamental facts. Apparently started in 1831. The oldest and the newest graves are these dates. There are 11 stones there, or 11 burials there. It is in the Vital Records of Dartmouth. It's called Grave Record 16, if you're looking in the old books on death records. Next slide, John. It has not been maintained, but since we've been talking about it, it's been cleared a little bit, and it looks a little better now. Next slide. Now, the Zala family. We haven't given you much on the Zala family, but the Zala family is a big family, very big family. There's 12 children living there in 1930. This is the 1930 census, an official document. And the father was Andrew Zala. He had a brother, Joseph, who lived on Taft Avenue, and they had a bunch of kids. And one of Joseph's children, one of Joseph's grandchildren was the chief of police in Dartmouth, Robert Zala. The two families ran a dairy. They had cows and they bottled milk, and they also sold other products and delivered it and bottled it on Taft Avenue, I believe, and raised the cows at the farm on where the Weaver House is. I have to confess that I'm related to the Zalas. My mother's first cousin married Felicia. His name was Sylvester Carroll. Sylvester Carroll lived on Cedar Dell, right next to the house that I live in. Felicia and her husband Sylvester moved to Connecticut, and a lot of these others I knew personally. Ruth worked and had a career at the university, and I'm not sure what she did. I think she was an administrative aide or something of that nature. And she tried to convince the university to do things with the house, but I haven't seen any of the files or any of the records, but I know she tried, and I know she was very disappointed in not being able to do that. Clayton used to be my source of transportation when I rode my thumb between Cedar Dell and Smith Mills. He was always going back and forth and gave me many rides. So, but all these kids, many of them married, some did not marry, and they have children. Some of them, Jim and I have been in touch with, and some of us on our website have been in touch. Susan has had contact with one of the grandchildren of this family who are interested in the house and doing something to interpret their family's residence there. Next slide, please. We're told by these,
Andrea?
Andrea Zale, Andrea, another name, but she's married, her maiden name is Zale. She went to UMass Dartmouth, I believe, but she lives on the Cape. She's quite interested in helping us out, so she'd probably join our group. And we're told that I know they had marriages at the house. They had many picnics, and of course, Polish Americans stick together like most ethnic groups do. And they hosted many picnics there for Polish American families and friends. And they operated their dairy business with Brother Joseph. Next slide, Don. Okay, now, our team. So far, this team includes these, but is not limited to the names I'm going to list to you. Len Travis is a professor of history at the university, and I believe some of his students might be involved also. Jordan Burson, who's the director of collections at the New Bedford Whaling Museum, and a member of the Dartmouth Historical Commission, has said he will be a member of our team. Judy Lund, chairperson of the Dartmouth Historical Commission, she's on a trip now in Ireland, or she'd be here tonight. Bob Barboza, a board member of our organization and the Dartmouth Heritage Preservation Trust, which has the Aiken House. Next slide, please. James O'Day, who lives in Russell's Mills some of the time in what is called the Pound Keeper's House. He's a professional landscape architect, earns a living at preservation and restoration, conservation, and is quite articulate, once worked in New Bedford, preserving old houses. Jim Costa, who's the leader of the neighborhood group for the Citadel Neighborhood Association, a very active group of community people trying to keep their neighborhood in good relationship with the campus and with the town and gown situation. Noah Kaput, who was here last time we had a presentation on old houses. He has restored an old 18th century Chase Road house, and his father was a professor of mathematics at the university. Got hit by a car, I believe, and died in a bad accident. And Zale family descendants as available, and of course I'm on the team, and there will probably be many other members of the various organizations that we're talking about who will volunteer to help out. So next slide, please. So now, enough of my talking. I'm going to get hoarse. I'd like to hear your thoughts and ideas, and I'll just pop up different subjects, and we can sort of talk. We can sort of talk about it while I get a drink. Uses. What uses could we make for the farmhouse? Yeah.
Seems to me a logical use of that is to turn that house into an educational center,
Okay.
restoring it back
Yeah.
to the days when Joseph Weaver lived there,
Yeah.
and use the gardens and the area as an educational center for both the students
Right.
and for local community.
Right.
Now, the disadvantage, of course, is that that's probably not financially advantageous to the university.
Well, we have some thoughts about the finances too. We could maybe start weaving that in, since we're talking about Joseph Weaver. We've made some inquiries with the man who's the head of the CDC. That's the Community Development Group that has public funding for doing preservation projects. And so far, we have, I would say, a reasonably positive response to the fact that this is a possibility, which probably means that if we come up with a project that is bought by the university, I'm wet now, but if that's bought by the university and going to cost some money, we may be able to support some of the cost with some of the CDC funding if it works out. Now, obviously, there's a process to get the funding, and you have to succeed, otherwise you don't get it. And it includes a vote in the town meeting and all that sort of stuff. And other people have done it. They did it for the Elfin House. They did it for the Aiken House. Maybe we can do it for this house. We'll see. But that's a pretty positive piece of information. Another point that Len made when he first came in tonight, he's talked about in the history department, they're considering some other majors that students can get a degree in a certain major. I think it's called local
Public history.
public history. And Len suggested that perhaps this house could be part of the scene for teaching that course. Because it'd be a live case, basically. Here's a house, here's some history of this house, here's a here, here are the gardens of the house, etc.
It's not only that, go ahead. I was going to say not only that, but this entire process that's beginning right now is stuff that students in public history need to know. How does a property become something like this for public use? Public history just means anything outside the academic world. So museums, archives, historic houses, preservation studies, things like that.
Oh, good.
So all of this would be of use to, how do you write a grant? How did this house on the campus survive all this time and then get turned into its new use?
One of the things it can be used for is reenactment.
Okay.
Reenactors,
Reenact, yeah.
you know, they can come together and pitch their tents for the Revolutionary War. Public can come and see how things were at the time of the Revolution.
Yep.
Civil War can be done the same way.
We're gonna have a call up to go to Michelle Point.
If you want to do that, it's a long walk.
Start marching.
But no, reenactors,
Oh, yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
they're pretty
It's a popular thing,
Yeah.
popular thing. Good, yeah.
And we also had an early discussion on using the building as a residence for, temporary residence for coming of visitors, professors, yeah.
Yeah, that was one of my original pitches when I went, when the former chancellor was there, and I think Lynn was there for that, that I know that a large university like UMass, there's a sequence of visiting professors who come to the campus for 1 or 2 semesters or for a year, and they often, I'm sure, find housing somewhere in the community, and the university pays the bill, I believe. Is that true? Yeah. That would make justification for the renovations to the house to make it habitable. You get a payback. You don't pay the bill to somebody else.
They usually will put them up for maybe 3 months until they can find other
Right.
accommodations.
So it could be used in that way. Okay, any other thoughts?
Like the gardens, they can use it like the kitchen garden of the time period,
Yeah.
types of plants that would be grown in the garden that can be used
Right.
for food and
Right.
things.
Now, many state universities have agricultural sides. I don't think we do here, but maybe someday they would teach botany or some other subject that would use the garden as a part of the deal. I know some people used to teach statistics, but statistics had a lot of origins in agricultural analysis of what happened when you did things. Different lot plots, and I won't get into it now, but it's kind of hairy stuff. And experimental design is called. And you might think of something like that. I thought that the idea of mushrooms is an interesting subject. There's a whole science of mushrooms, what you can eat and what you can't. Toadstools and mushrooms aren't the same thing, I guess. And you might have some focus on some teaching plan for how to distinguish good mushrooms from not so good mushrooms. Next slide, though. Because you're allowed to come up with ideas about old subjects at any time, but I'm going to kind of try to move through. Now, what about the repairs and the restoration? We're going to need to make a list, and you know, somebody's going to have to make a contractor's list of things to do that are going to cost money. I imagine we're going to need to fix the windows, the roof, the plumbing, electricity, siding, you name it. So,
But now we're kind of, is it gonna be a restoration or a renovation? Because if it's gonna be a restoration, then you need to have somebody come in and provide an evaluation.
true.
So they need to come in and, somebody from Roger Williams, for an example,
Right, some
they
expert on,
they would have to come in and do some
Right.
type of an inventory.
right. We haven't made that, obviously. We'd have to make that decision.
Because if you start putting together a list that doesn't fit within the
It won't
constraints
happen.
of the restoration,
Yeah,
then
and
it's kind
CDC
of
won't
lost.
fund it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there'll be requirements to meet certain standards in what we do.
Is there any part of the building that does meet current
I'm
standards?
not here.
Is there any part of the building that currently is meeting current standards?
Well, in fact, we walked through the building. It didn't look too bad, right?
Yeah, it's
It didn't look historic.
reasonably modernized. It's all plastered, you know, modern kitchen, relatively
Modernized by
modern.
1950, maybe.
Yeah, and so the question is, if you're gonna restore it to Joseph Weaver, it's easy, you just take everything out. But if you're gonna make it usable, then it's a whole different story.
Yeah, they're two opposite things, and Susan makes a great point. If you're gonna do one thing, there's a requirement to find out what it is you're gonna do according to some standards. If you're gonna do something, a different thing, it's a different set of standards, so those have to be determined. So,
Then how close or similar is this to the Atkins house?
The Aiken,
Atkins house?
Aiken House,
If
not
you-
similar at all.
Yeah, in terms of age though, you're only about 20 years difference, maybe 30.
All right, okay.
So,
But the outside looks a little bit similar, but the inside looks like somebody tried to modernize it around 1942 or something like that.
If this was a Lemuel Barker house,
Yeah.
where do you think the lumber would have come from?
Right from
Barker's Mill?
Chambers Barker Sawmill,
Yeah,
right,
it was just right down the road.
down the road, that's right. And one of the things we may ask to do is to get behind some of those partitions to see what this construction looks like, so we can determine some things we don't know.
Yeah, I think she's right. The first thing that really kind of needs to be done is to have someone with the expertise come in and do a thorough survey of the house, and I think that would include
Right.
taking off parts of the, the
For
walls
sure.
and looking at the timber that's there.
Right.
Is it restored? Is it circular sawn, or is it straight sawn? I mean, trying to figure out the age of the house, whether or not this really
Right,
was a
whether the
rebuild.
fire really destroyed the original house,
Yeah, and
or it didn't, there's a
or
big
whether this
question.
is a rebuild, but also just the anatomy of the house, we don't know it. I mean, we don't know
Right,
the distance between studs, but there's a whole
and we
lot of
haven't been
stuff.
down cellar yet.
The original layout,
Right,
I've been in the cellar, and actually it's in pretty good shape. It seems to be.
you've been in the cellar?
I have, yeah.
Yeah.
Is it the original framing, do you think?
I didn't see any evidence of burning myself, so unless everything burned,
But
And they took it
construction
out.
wise, it's the
it
original.
looked sound to me.
Yeah.
And it looked like certainly like it could be, from my limited expertise, it certainly looked like it could be around
I
19th
got a
century.
lot of background in that sort of thing, so.
Yeah.
Next time you go, just let me know,
Yeah.
if I get an opening there, that, I'll tag along.
Okay,
Because ultimately, I think the restoration might be less expensive all around than And then what's the other word?
Preservation.
Well, no, preservation of the house is kind of like, well, standard, that's job one, stabilize it, first of
Yeah.
all. Whatever's happening to
Fix
it,
the
let's
leaks,
stabilize it.
or,
Until we figure out where we want to go with either restoration or renovation.
Yeah.
It's the other word I was looking for. I think renovation is ultimately going to be more expensive because that just means you've got to put in lots of modern
all
infrastructure
kind of modern stuff.
that maybe is not the mission we want for the house.
Susan?
I think that's sort of what you want to think. You want to think that it would simplify it by going with restoration, but that's not necessarily true because not everybody has that area of expertise. If you get a restoration contractor in there, it can run into quite a bit of money. Ask the people that were involved with the preservation of the Aiken House.
Good point.
Yeah, I just think that the Aiken house was in a lot worse shape. You had powder post beetles and it was collapsing. So maybe that added to the cost, but can you get the CDC funds just for the outside, or does it have to be the whole building?
We don't know, we don't know.
Okay.
We did get a positive response from the man that's the head of the CDC that said it might be possible. It's still a process to go through.
Yeah.
Still gotta go through town hall as well as the CDC group. So, it's by far a slam dunk, but it's something worthy of trying, I would say.
Some of the work can be done by vocational students, just like we did down at the Dartmouth Range. You know, and all they've got the ability to do it, you know, they've been restoring places around, building places. They've done restoration work.
Yeah.
So it's an option, that's all,
Yeah,
you know, put it on the side to think about, because that's labor that is good for the students and everybody else concerned.
Yeah, the key, of course, is that it's gotta be controlled
Yes,
to meet the standards and stuff like
they
that.
could follow, you know, professional documentation, you know, architectural documents and so forth. The instructors at the school know what they're doing, you know, because it's their background, and so they're teaching, you know,
Right.
and then the architect is involved.
Well, we have a good source at Roger Williams too, because we have some experts. And some of the people that we met when we worked with the people at the Halfin House know what they're doing too. And I'm quite sure we can attract one of them. It may cost some money, but that's part of what it's about. To do the study,
Well, the study is one thing, the labor to bring it back
that's a whole different
is a
thing.
different thing, yeah.
Especially if the bones are good, you know.
Yeah,
If the
the
house
bones are good.
is in fairly good shape, as
Right.
it seemed to me. You know, I'd stick my fingers in the foundations and things like that, see if I could find any softness, and I couldn't.
Yeah.
You've still got all the
Yeah.
utilities to think about, you know, to bring it into a usable space.
Right.
That's the thing.
Depending on
But I was-
how it's going to be.
We could perhaps, maybe someone here knows, who was consulted about the handy house or the Westport Historical
Oh, I'm quite
Society
sure.
Handy House.
So the people from DNRT, they battled us about the Halfin House.
No, I'm saying the handy house.
Let's
The
mention the
handy house, yeah, the people who did the handy house were some of the same people who helped us with the Elfin House.
Okay.
I can't think of the man's name, but the guy that did the study,
Yeah.
there's a big thick study that's available on the handy house, and he did one on the Elfin House also.
Well, it's a small house, there should be a small house.
Do you remember his name, Susan?
If it was somebody other than Philip Marshall, I don't remember.
It wasn't
who
Phil
it is.
Marshall, no. No, it was somebody who had been a student of Phil Marshall's years ago. He's now a big guy. Anyway, next slide, please. In terms of historical interpretation, what stories are we gonna, do we want to tell any stories? Or do we not want to tell stories about Joseph Weaver, the house, the sailors, the swords, the other families that lived there, or any of that stuff? I mean, if it's going to be a historical property, I would think, personally, we want to tell some stories about, or have them have interpretive information available for somebody to read if they visited. But I'm open to any other ideas, any particular.
Do it like a kiosk, like we've got in different villages that, what's his
Like
name?
Joseph
did. It's very simple. You tell the history of the thing right there on one. You don't have to go in the house or anything, you can read it from the outside if the house isn't open.
And with modern technology, there's all kinds of ways you could go and hook up to the web.
Right.
Well, it seems to me you've got three main stories you've talked about here. You've got the Weaver family, you've got the Zala family, and you've got the house itself.
Yeah,
And those three stories, it seems to me, need to be told
yeah,
somehow.
yeah,
As to just how, that's for another time, I think,
yeah.
but certainly there has to be some historical interpretation.
Yeah, I would think in terms of being attractive to the campus people, to Michael and his, whoever, he must have a board he's gonna report to, but I would think they have to meet certain levels of interest in what we're gonna do. And so I would think historical interpretation would be a pretty important part of this whole deal. Okay, next slide.
I have a question.
Yes, Elizabeth.
Have you discussed its access or public use? I mean, we keep talking about the university, and what about having it be open to the public, not just for the campus use? Has anybody thought about that? I mean, that may be very complicated, but when you're talking about having his stories and uses like reenactors or exhibits, I mean, you can have exhibits inside the building that are rotating or whatever, but I'm just thinking there's a lot you can do with the educational aspect if you can interact with the public, that would be, I mean, obviously, once in a while, UMass would interact, they might have an event, but I just wondered if there would be any possibility of ongoing open hours and certain times of the year, or, you know, if you're gonna get it all available to do things with, but I don't know.
Well, one of the things, thoughts that crossed my mind as you were talking is that the university usually has people visiting it to decide if their kid wants to go to that school. And it might be nice to have a place on campus that is a little bit of a tourist attraction, historical tourism, to say, this is a different looking kind of architecture, but the original farmhouse that was here is here, and there's a little bit of history on this campus too. That might help them attract students, I'm not sure. Sue, you had a point?
No, I was just thinking about what Elizabeth said, but then some organization has to step up to be its guardian, if you will. And right now, there are a number of historical related organizations in town, all of whom are stretched to the max, including this one. So I don't know who you're gonna get to be available with paid staff, and it gets really complicated. It seems like it would be better suited for use by the university, and we could just piggyback on whatever it is they do.
One of the obstacles that you would have to also address is handicap accessibility to get in and around. You don't have to use toilets, you don't have to have toilets in there, but to get in, you're gonna need a ramp somehow to get through a door that is the right size to get in the building for people who want to go and see. They don't have to, you know, they can make a big circle around the house, I don't know what it looks like, and then go back out again. But it is a possible obstacle when you open it to the public. So, because they want a certain amount of money has to go into putting accessibility in as a percentage to the amount of construction costs it does the, you know, restore with. So.
It's gonna depend on what era that house is gonna be brought back to. Because if it's brought all the way back to Weaver, then they've got to build outhouses.
Don't depend on it.
Do you have a map that shows where this house is in relation to the roads and stuff for the university?
Yeah, that was
How do
way
you-
back on the slide.
Yeah, that was on the slides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you remind me?
But it showed some other buildings near it?
Yeah, there's some campus buildings that I think are slated to come down. I'm not sure what's going back up.
What do you mean by campus buildings? Are they
Housing,
housing?
yeah, family housing, student family housing.
Student housing is right near it?
Pretty close.
Yes.
So, and the cemetery, is that,
Cemetery's quite distant from it.
but near the housing?
It's not near anything. It's at the far end of the property, almost on somebody else's property.
400 feet.
400 feet
From the house,
from the house.
but still on the university's property?
Oh, yeah, university got about 705 acres of property.
And your mention of the outhouses reminds me that one of the other attractions of this is that archaeologists would love to find the outhouses
That's
that
right.
were used by this
More
family,
artifacts.
because they are treasure troves.
We
Archaeology.
have one somewhere located on either side of this building.
Yeah, yeah. There'd be another project.
Just for the archaeology part of it, there are two smaller foundations on the pond, and also there's the farm dump that's been there for since the beginning of time.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Is there an archaeology course of any kind?
There is some, there's a couple of professors that do anthropology,
Yeah.
and they'll do some archaeological stuff too, but we don't have a field school or anything quite like that.
Okay, one of the things, Susan sent me a note, and somebody else brought up the same subject, that as far as the grounds and gardens go, what's the club that you,
Buzzards Bay Garden Club,
Parsons Bay Garden Club,
yeah.
might be involved?
They might be, they have some pretty knowledgeable people as part of their membership
Yeah.
that have worked in the nursery industry, but are also very familiar with, they had also done some work with buttonwood.
Yeah.
And doing some plantings.
Like colonial garden type?
Well, not so much, I think it mostly had to do with replacing planting material that was used in the original Olmsted design,
Okay.
maybe, as I understood it. So this would be slightly different.
Okay.
I'm just wondering where the Buzzards Bay Garden Club is located.
It's the members, two of the members that I'm aware of are in Dartmouth. But there, it's like
I've been trying to get a hold of New Bedford Garden Club, and I've tried to get a hold of Fall River Garden Club.
Oh, you got some numbers, Jim?
yeah.
Jim also suggested to me about what Bristol Aggies as a local
Resource.
resource for doing something with the gardens and stuff. Bristol Aggies, of course, is a well-known local.
But to
high
make this,
school.
to make this interesting, maybe get the gardens to the colonial period or whatever type of apples they grew or something low maintenance, because they've had the
Yeah,
garden.
they advertise orchards in that newspaper article.
Yeah, so maybe,
There's no such thing as well, you ought to know from Brian Maderas, there's no such thing as a low-maintenance orchard,
I know,
right?
I know. But I'm just thinking,
I'm
they
just
tried to grow
thinking.
gardens, vegetables there for the past couple of years, and it looks like it's unsuccessful. So maybe something that less maintenance, some type of shrubbery or tree.
Dwarf trees and stuff.
I don't know, I know when they, I heard maybe here, there was somebody giving a history of the Native Americans attacked Dartmouth, and they burned, they took apples. And it was in early spring, and I don't know what brand or what type of apple that was, but something along those lines. And maybe plantings around the house that are also historical type of, maybe the lilacs or whatever.
That's where you need Joseph.
Lilacs around the outhouse,
Yeah, things like that.
always.
That's where you need Joseph for all the fruit trees.
Well, again, this is where archaeology might be able to help, because they, they're the ones who find the ancient spores and seeds in the ground that tell you what was being grown there at the time, and
Right,
maybe able to tell us just exactly where the gardens were. I
right,
mean, presumably, we know the Zalas can tell us where their garden was.
right, right.
But, you know, perhaps that's the garden perhaps it's always been the garden there,
Right.
which would be great.
Well, people do what they call raised bed gardens,
Yeah.
all kinds of places.
Sure. I was wondering, when you're talking about grounds and gardens here, do you think I mean, obviously, the area right around it is not very attractive. There's a lot of outbuildings there, there's trailers and stuff like
Trash,
that.
right.
Yeah, and I understand, of course, it's an area that's used by the maintenance people, and they need space. Do you think Mike would be willing to talk about the possibility of, over the years, finding another space for some of that stuff, or maybe, you know, returning the grounds into something a little bit more
More
pleasant
attractive, yeah.
to go with the house?
Yeah, because it's right near the pond, you know.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can't get rid of the student building that's there, of course. But, you know, on the other side of the house is where all this maintenance stuff is, and perhaps it could end up eventually going somewhere else.
Right, because there's plenty of land on the campus.
I think so, and, if it could be available.
Their maintenance is on the other side of the campus.
Just push next.
Just did.
There you go. There you go.
I only did it twice.
Now, one of the things, of course, we could emphasize in some of the interpretation is the ethnic Polish farm families. There are other families in Dartmouth that were ethnic Polish, I believe. And I'm not sure what it is you would focus on, but I know they had certain ethnic food and festivals and farming techniques, etc. But I'm not sure what that would be, but somebody might want to suggest that. Next slide, please. Given that we got a Revolutionary War veteran and a Civil War veteran, it's a possibility that a theme, a veterans theme, might become one of the themes for this property. But people seem to be quite interested in veterans and in honoring their services and stuff. So they're both buried in that burial ground, and they're both connected with that house. Any thoughts on the veterans thing?
Well, we can contact the town veteran, whatever his name is there.
Yeah.
I spoke to him.
You spoke with him?
Yeah.
What's he say? Anything?
Yeah, he suggested contacting Judy.
Judy Lund.
Yeah, and also, I have the other name here.
Did anybody talk to anybody from Fort Rodman or Tabor?
Not yet, I know of.
I would think that would be a good connection,
Yeah.
being both a Revolutionary and Civil
All
War.
right.
Well, with Memorial Day coming up, isn't the Boy Scouts, are they the ones who go on and plant the flags at the veterans?
I
Somebody
think
plants
the
the flags.
VFW does that.
And now the next one's over across road, the ones to talk to. And the only person that I would contact is Joe Michaud. That's the only one that I know of that belongs to that group.
The other person that Roy Oliveira, the town veterans agent, suggested I call Paul Lamoureux. I don't know him.
I don't know him either.
He's involved with the Civil War reenactments. And he helps out the monument in by the Slocum Road, I believe.
Okay, that's,
Paul Lavasser?
He told me Lamoureux.
It's Lavasser.
Okay.
That's probably the why.
Yeah, he's a reenactor.
yeah, he does a lot of,
Joe Michaud's mother was a high school classmate of mine, and I know Joe fairly well. I'll try to remember to give him a call.
So, yeah, so they're talking about grants, getting grants from the veterans.
Yeah.
Rick can get American flags, I mean, we can go out there and stick them in the ground for all that matters, you know?
Okay, any other thoughts on veteran stuff? Next one,
Maybe a plaque for the cemetery, is that it?
a plaque for the cemetery, that would work. Okay, that's it.